Hello. Welcome back to another episode of Cory Hughes' Bloody History. Today we're going to be continuing on with the Kerry Thornley Files, Part 9. So we went through the two primary Kerry Thornley files that are located within the Jim Garrison papers. We covered a lot of stuff, way too much for me to even try to recap here. So I highly recommend you go back and watch or listen to those first, 10 or 12 hours of content on Kerry Thornley to catch up to speed. What I will say is that Kerry Thornley was one of two men who was impersonating Oswald in New Orleans and in Dallas, the other being William Seymour. Now, there are a couple one-offs like Larry Crawford, and other people could make the argument that a few other people were in places at times that Oswald was seen that were not Kerry Thornley or William Seymour, and there probably were. But when you come to understand the totality of the involvement of the men impersonating Oswald by going through not only Jim Garrison's Kerry Thornley files, but Harold Weisberg's false Oswald files, and there's about 100 files in the false Oswald files. What you'll find is that it becomes pretty evident which appearances of Oswald were Kerry Thornley and which were William Seymour based on description, demeanor, company, associations, that kind of thing. So, this particular document we're going over today is called New Kerry Thornley Leads from the Garrison Papers. Now, as I've said before, oftentimes Garrison would lump like things together, right? Like I used the example of the Sergei Arcacha file, where for the first 35 pages doesn't even talk about Arcacha at all, talks about de Winterland, right? So obviously Garrison knew it was Arcacha at de Winterland, not David Ferry, thus he combined the Winterland stuff into the Arcacha file where it was relevant. So the same thing is done across the board in all the files. Some of Garrison's best files are literally called his miscellaneous files. Miscellaneous to who, right? Or his lead files, right? See, these generic titled folders are some of the best stuff out there. And we'll get to, we'll do a bunch of shows on the lead files. There's a lot of information there. But back to this particular document, Kerry Thornley, as he was impersonating Oswald, and Garrison had figured that out, he lumped a lot of the like documents together in the Kerry Thornley folder. Therefore, we might go over some stuff that doesn't seem to have anything to do with Kerry Thornley, but Garrison thought it did significantly enough to put it in the folder, right? So this one in here in particular, this is a July 7th, 1967 memorandum to Jim Garrison from Jim Alcock, reference Clifford Joseph Wormser, owner of Cliff's Junkyard. Where is that? Old Gentilly Highway. Must be New Orleans because it doesn't really say. It says up top, reference Kerry Thornley, analogous scenario to Whitworth Furniture Store in Dallas. So the Whitworth Furniture Store in Dallas, what he's referring to is a person identified as Oswald enters into the furniture store and asks about asks about the gun shop because it used to have been a gun shop. So he goes into the furniture store and he's identified as Oswald, but he is seen with a pregnant woman with a child, of course, Marina, and then Oswald is seen driving away in a vehicle, a station wagon, right? So Kerry Thornley was definitely that man, not Lee Harvey Oswald. Kerry Thornley was connected to Marina in New Orleans and in Dallas, and Kerry Thornley and Marina worked together to set Oswald up. So that is what he's referring to when he's talking about the Whitworth Furniture Store in Dallas. He's saying this is an analogous scenario, meaning a person who is believed to have been Oswald, but clearly not Oswald, and he believes it to be Kerry Thornley, which it most certainly was. On July 7th, 1967, approximately 3 p.m., I interviewed Mr. Clifford Joseph Wormser in the office of Louis Ivan. During our interview, Mr. Wormser's attorney, Salvatore Panzecca, was present. Mr. Wormser is the owner of Cliff's Junkyard, located at Route 6, Box 584, Old Gentilly Highway. In the summer of 1963, and I have that is circled, and there's a note off to the side. It says, question, month, with a question mark, note. Maybe, and it looks like 40, but I don't know how that would be relevant. But then this bears significant something who is Cuban. Okay, so there's a note here already indicating that there's a Cuban involved here. So that might give us an indication that this is either early in the 60s, 60, 61, and it's Kerry Thornley, or it is later. But here this says September of 63, Lee Harvey Oswald, and there's a note to a Cuban. If you happen to watch my episode on the coming chapter from my book called The Mercenaries on Hall, Howard, and Seymour, then you'll know that it was William Seymour who was seen all over the place with a husky Latino with a pockmarked face, right? However, I will throw this caveat out there. Because of my recent connections and understanding, particularly with the Bolton Ford incident, and something that Kerry Thornley said in his statements to Garrison, he mentions a Cuban he was associated with that he knew, that he thinks he met through David Ferry, named Leopoldo. Okay, so where does the name Leopoldo pop up again? Pops up in the Sylvia Odio incident, right? Leopoldo and Leon Oswald go to Sylvia Odio's house, and as I've already talked about, that was unquestionably William Seymour, Lawrence Howard, and Lauren Hall. William Seymour having given the name of Leon Oswald, okay? So before I proceed here, I just needed to reiterate that if you have Oswald and he's seen with a Cuban, it may in fact be Kerry Thornley if it was in fact the early 60s, meaning January of 61, the Bolton Ford incident, up until, when did William Seymour and Lawrence Howard head to New Orleans? That would have been sometime in mid-1962, right about the time that Oswald got back from the Soviet Union, right? So depending on when the situation is, you might be able to determine that it was Kerry Thornley with Lawrence Howard, like at Bolton Ford, which is ultimately what I'm coming to the conclusion of. And later on, all the sightings of Oswald with the husky Latino with the pockmarked face becomes William Seymour. So let me continue here. In the summer of 63, Mr. Wormser owned a junkyard bearing the same name at 3800 Ferdinand Street in the city of New Orleans. As remembered by Mr. Wormser, sometime in the month of September 63, Lee Harvey Oswald, his wife and baby, and 2 other males came to the junkyard and sold Mr. Wormser a 1955 Pontiac station wagon for junk. Mr. Wormser cannot recall the specific date this transaction took place. Now, right off the bat, in as far as the clues as to who the real identity of this person is, because it's not Lee Harvey Oswald, right? So we're trying to determine, is this William Seymour or is this Kerry Thornley? Now, the indicators that it would be Kerry Thornley is that I can't really say specifically September 63 indicates Kerry Thornley because we have a sighting of Oswald with the husky Latino with the pockmarked face at the Havana bar, where Oswald orders a lemonade and Lawrence Howard is seen carrying him out of there as he's throwing up drunk wearing the clip-on bow tie, right? Definitely not Lee Harvey Oswald, definitely William Seymour. And that was in September of 63 also. But the caveat here is that this Pontiac station wagon, if I'm not mistaken, is a white station wagon. And a white station wagon, Pontiac station wagon, was owned by Lauren Hall, who drove it from Los Angeles to Dallas. And was Lauren Hall, can I place Lauren Hall in New Orleans? No, not at the moment. He might have been there because he was associating with Lawrence Howard and William Seymour. But most of my observation of Lauren Hall is in Dallas particularly, like everything from the meeting with Walker to his presence in the book depository. But he owned a white Pontiac station wagon, right? So it's kind of a weird coincidence that this Lee Harvey Oswald, with his wife and baby and 2 other males, sold him a junk white Pontiac station wagon, which matches the same kind of car that Lauren Hall had driven in from Los Angeles. Now, being that I've been able to connect Kerry Thornley to Marina, I'm going to tell you that this is certainly Kerry Thornley. Okay, so let me continue. Oswald, his two companions, and his wife and baby came to the junkyard in an older model car about 4 p.m. Upon arrival, one of Oswald's companions, a dark-complexioned male, probably of Latin extraction, addressed Mr. Wormser by the name of Cliff and said that he had an automobile they wanted to sell for junk. The station wagon to be sold was pushed to the junkyard by... Wait a minute. The station wagon to be sold was pushed to the junkyard by the car Oswald was riding in. Okay, so they pushed the car in with another car. Oswald was not the driver of the car. The Latin indicated the car to be sold belonged to Oswald. Oswald and his other male companion did very little or no talking at all. At one point, Mrs. Wormser started for the car in which Mrs. Oswald and the baby were seated in an apparent attempt to strike up a conversation with Mrs. Oswald. At this time, the Latin told her that the woman could not understand her because she was Russian and did not speak any English. The car was sold for $15 after Oswald and the Latin took 2 tires from it. All told, Oswald and his companions and wife and baby were in Mr. Wormser's presence for about half an hour. Mr. Wormser has never conveyed this information to any federal agency. Male description number 1, about 5'6" tall, dark complexion, Latin type with black curly hair, approximately 165 pounds with a stocky frame, age 23 to 25. Okay, so that's not Lawrence Howard, is it? Lawrence Howard is 5'10" to 5'11", dark complected, but he weighs well over 200 pounds. So whom were we talking about? Whom was running in these circles at the time with Ferry and Kerry Thornley and that whole New Orleans crew? I would have to say this is probably Louis Rebel. Louis Rebel is kind of an outlier in the assassination. I can't directly link him to the assassination plot itself, but he took over the French Revolutionary Democratica, whatever that was, the Cuban organization that was run by Sergio Arcacha Smith. Louis Rebel took that over after Smith was removed because he was embezzling funds, because like I've said a million times, none of these fucks gave a shit about Cuba. Cuba is a distraction. So yes, this male, not Lawrence Howard. So being that it's not Lawrence Howard, we can most likely eliminate it being anybody other than Kerry Thornley. He's wearing dirty clothes, somewhat similar in appearance to a mechanic who'd been working on automobiles. This man spoke English without an accent. No noticeable scars. Male number 2, long blonde hair, long sideburns, about 5'10" tall, very slender, 22 to 24 years of age, no noticeable scars. Oswald's description: slender, blondish, sandy hair, full head of hair, wearing khaki pants and a sport shirt of unknown color, appeared to be 27 or 28 years of age, no noticeable scars, neat appearing, and no growth of beard. Mr. Wormser stated that the woman in the car with the baby appeared to have black hair, but could not furnish any further description. The baby appeared to be of a very tender age. Mr. Panzeca at the outset of the interview informed me that Mr. Wormser would probably be used as a defense witness in the Shaw trial. The obvious strategy here being that if the man identified as Oswald by Mr. Wormser was in fact Lee Harvey Oswald, and he did not have a beard at this time, it could be used to impeach the testimony of Russo, who described Oswald as having a slight whisker growth at the meeting at David Ferry's apartment. Okay, this becomes crucial when we get to identifying Kerry Thornley as the bearded beatnik who was seen by Perry Russo at the party in September of '63. Okay, so let me sum up. Perry Russo ends up, through David Ferry, meeting a man whom he describes as being called Leon Oswald, right? So he meets him. He describes him as Ferry's roommate. He describes him as a bearded beatnik. He describes him as being dirty, right? Definitely not Oswald, okay? So some of the confusion is that how could you say it's Oswald if he had a big old beard when they met? But it says here clearly that he had slight whisker growth at the meeting in David Ferry's apartment, right? And that's correct. At the actual party that they had, where it is alleged that they discussed the assassination of the president, and Clay Shaw, David Ferry, and all these guys were there, I 100% believe that happened. I really didn't for a long time. I thought that was propaganda. But I've come around to realize, yes, that did actually happen. But no, it was not Oswald there. It was Kerry Thornley. And he was described as having slight whisker growth by Perry Russo. But Perry Russo had met this individual 3 to 4 times in the weeks leading up to that party. Right? He'd gone over to David Ferry's house, and this guy was there. He was a disgusting bearded beatnik, and he had a full beard previous to this one meeting at the party at Ferry's apartment. So this became crucial because we have pictures of Kerry Thornley with a big old glorious beard and his big old beatnik ass in 1963 in the months leading up to the assassination. But then he shaves it off in September of 63, and this becomes important when you start to differentiate some of the different Oswald sightings. Right? So when when you hear people talking about Oswald with a beard, you can pretty much say for sure that was Kerry Thornley, and it was probably between April and August of 1963, right? But then when you see people who saw Oswald and he said he had, like here, Perry Russo said he had slight whisker growth. Other people said that he had whiskers as well. Then you can identify that it was Kerry Thornley because he shaved off his beard. And when you come to understand who Oswald was, that guy shaved every day, right? Like he was still in the military. He never even had stubble, okay? So that is one of the techniques I used in order to identify which of the Oswalds we're dealing with, right? Oftentimes you'll see Oswald described as having a real smart-ass attitude and having heavy eyebrows. That I found oftentimes to be correlated with incidents that I believe was William Seymour impersonating Lee Harvey Oswald, right? So you kind of, when you go through the 100 or 150 or whatever it is, incidents of Lee Harvey Oswald being misidentified when he's actually somebody else, you start to identify these particular character traits of the men who were impersonating Oswald, right? So, yeah, I'm rambling. Let me continue. Mr. Wormser does not believe that he could identify either the Latin on the other male with the long blonde hair if he saw them again today. Okay, so April 11th, 1969, a memo to Jim Garrison from Andrew Scambria, reference Shaw leads to. Up in the top right says reference Shaw, Thornley, Oswald, and Jules Kimball in written handwriting. Mrs. Jean Kelton Lead. See the Sanders memo of 4/11/68. Mrs. Kelton lived at 905 Governor Nichols Street from 63 to 66. She said that she saw that Shaw used to visit a young man who lived in this apartment building quite often. She said that the young man was gay and referred to Shaw as his patron. Mrs. Skelton doesn't remember the boy's name, but she said that John Carter, who also lived at 905 Governor Nichols, could also give us information on this gay friend of Shaw's. Mrs. Kelton also remembers seeing Shaw go in and out of Cosmos Bar on several occasions. Okay, I need to pause right here, and we're going to end up talking about this another time, not today, but this name, John Carter, it becomes rather relevant because John Carter is one of the names that was staying at the boarding house at 1026 North Beckley, the one where Kerry Thornley actually lived, right? So Oswald never stayed at any of the boarding houses. Kerry Thornley was staying in Dallas in those boarding houses as O.H. Lee or whatever fucking fake name they decide, Osborne or whatever they came up with at the time, because Lee Harvey Oswald's name isn't on any of those things. But here we have John Carter connected to a document in Kerry Thornley files. John Carter staying at the boarding house that Kerry Thornley stayed at in Dallas, and he's a connection to Clay Shaw. Right? That boarding house was chock full of motherfuckers, right? The other person staying at the boarding house was Kenneth Cody, who was Joe Cody, Dallas cop, his uncle, who was the guy who flew Ferry's plane back to Dallas back to Shreveport on the day of the assassination. So yeah, some really interesting names start to pop up in kind of this weird synchronicity that you see here in these files. The Dr. Jacob Harold Ketty lead, or Ketty, K-E-T-Y, says, see the Sanders memo of 2/14/68. Dr. Ketty told Sanders that Greg Donnelly, who lives in Abita Springs, could give us some information on Clay Shaw. Donnelly said that he knew Clay Shaw when he was poor and before Shaw, quote, was adopted by Brent. Donnelly, who is gay, lives with Carl Kramer, a sculptor, and openly says that they are married to each other. Their phone number is in Abita Springs in 892-2187. The Jack Frazier lead. See the Fraser letters of 1168, 122967, Sanders memo of 3668, Scambria memo of 91668, and the Reed memo of 92568. Perhaps some time should be spent cultivating Fraser. He could be a good source of information. He ran the Ryder Coffee House where, according to several people, Oswald frequented. He was a friend of Thornley, Will Brady, Ivan Cotman, Howard Cohen, John Camus, and Helen Gladstone, all Ryder House regulars. One rumor was that he took a trip to Mexico with Oswald, and Cohen has denied this. Let me pause right here. Okay, so when it says here that Jack Fraser, and we've talked about Jack Fraser before in both the Kerry Thornley files and I believe in the David Ferry files. When we talk about Jack Fraser, he's obviously a CIA guy because he's putting up his job as CIA fronts for a bunch of employees, okay? But then it says there's rumors that he took a trip with Oswald to Mexico City, or to Mexico, which if you go to Mexico, you go to Mexico City. That's as far as the assassination is concerned. So the implication here is that, and also it says Thornley, colon, in handwriting in the column. So obviously, Garrison is linking Jack Fraser with Kerry Thornley on the trip to Mexico City. That's what I'm getting from this, even though it never outright says it. Like, Garrison was really careful in his files. He never outright says anything, but the way that he implies things kind of gives you what the motive of thinking that he had. And so that's kind of where we're at with this. I believe that it was Thornley who went, well, it's clearly Thornley who went to Mexico City. And here we have a good lead that Jack Fraser went with him, possibly as a handler. He has said that he believes Brady's deportation and Oswald's leaflet distribution are connected in some way. He said, I think that Brady was deported because the CIA wanted him out of the country. According to Daphne Stapleton, who lived in one of the Ryder House apartments, Oswald came to the Ryder House one day and asked her, is Jack here? When she said no, Oswald then wrote his name on a piece of paper and told her to give it to Jack and tell him I was here. Fraser has denied all of this to Barbara Reed and Harold Weisberg. However, he did say that as best he can remember, he's never met Lee Harvey Oswald, but he cannot rule out the possibility. So yeah, that becomes pretty interesting. When you start to understand who Jack Fraser is, it's obvious he was some kind of handler who provided fronts for people, but also obviously kept tabs on people. If he went to Mexico City with Thornley, he was obviously there as part of the operation. Any interactions, I would go as far as to say that any interactions between Oswald and Jack Fraser were definitely Kerry Thornley and Fraser, not Oswald. Howard Cohen leads. See the Fraser letter of 122967, the Scambria memo of 91668, the Reed memo of 92568. Cohen's name has come up several times in connection with Oswald. He worked at the Ryder Coffee House and lived in one of the upstairs apartments. He was a friend of all the Ryder House regulars. He led a Marxist discussion group at the Ryder House. According to Stapleton, Oswald went to Cohen's apartment looking for him one day, but Cohen was not at home. A last check, according to Reed, Cohen was in Japan. Of course, this guy's CIA, right? Jack Burnside lead. Burnside, in my opinion, is worth talking to again. He was a friend of all the regulars at the Ryder Coffee House, especially Thornley. Jack Fraser pointed him out as someone who may be able to give us some information on Oswald and Thornley. He was supposedly in Fong's restaurant on Decatur Street with Thornley when Oswald came in to meet Thornley. He told this to someone and said that Thornley introduced him to Oswald. However, when confronted with this by Weisberg and Reed, he denied it. So whether or not this statement here is true regarding the connection between Oswald and Thornley, it is another indicator that Oswald knew Thornley. And I think this becomes very apparent when you get to the neighbor of Oswald who said that she saw Thornley. She didn't know anybody's name over there, but when shown pictures by Garrison, she said that she saw Thornley over at Oswald's place so often that she wasn't sure which one of them that Marina was married to, right? So that's a pretty good statement from a witness, who actually is providing some information on something that they don't really understand the significance of. That's a great example because that is not the kind of thing that somebody would make up, right? She gave kind of a little anecdote, and anecdotes are not something that liars know to think up as they're lying. So, yeah. So one day I'll dig up her stuff and show you, because it's such a linchpin for me, because that one witness fills in all the blanks on all the unidentified sightings that involved the person as Oswald, who was driving a car, who was with Marina, but definitely was not Oswald, right? That pretty much makes very clear that it was Kerry Thornley in all of those situations involving Marina. Now, I say all of them because I can't connect William Seymour in any way to fucking Marina. Why would I be able to? They were mercenaries on the outskirts who were not directly connected in as far as their interactions with any of Oswald's people, right? They were setting Oswald up in all the right places at the shooting range and at the car dealership and all those stuff. And so they didn't have any interactions with Marina, so therefore I can't ever say that William Seymour was in the presence of Marina to set Oswald up. Therefore, 100% of the incidents that I can say were Oswald was with Marina, where he was driving a car, was definitely Kerry Thornley. So that's kind of like the logical deduction, or series of logical deductions I went through to come to that conclusion. And once you realize that, like, it's like, holy shit, like so much of the case falls into place. You start to realize so many of the incidents that we were told were Oswald was not Oswald. And so when you have all these incidents that aren't Oswald, that they're telling you is Oswald, it's a fictional story. Oswald becomes a construct, right? The life of Lee Harvey Oswald that we've been told is a fiction. Once again, I'm getting sidetracked. I've been tired the last couple days. I haven't gotten shit accomplished. Haven't done the goddamn thing. And I've been super fucking tired. So I need to snap out of it. I'm about halfway through my chapter on Kerry Thornley, which I'm going to wrap up by the end of this month. What is it? The 25th, 27th? Give me give me a week. That's going to be done, and I'll have the Jack Valenti chapter, the final chapter of my book on Jack Valenti, will be done by the end of July. So that's my new deadline, to have the book completely done, edited, not all that stuff, by the end of July, and have the book out in people's hands the first week of August. God, I hope I can pull that off. I don't see why I can't. I should be able to. But God, that's gonna have some good stuff in it. That's gonna have some good stuff, because that covers like all like how the actual assassination went down, like how all the men got out of the building and the book depository, how they escaped from the grassy knoll, like all that stuff. How the shooter at the Daltex really got arrested by Baker and Truly, or by Baker, and then the whole Baker and Truly incident with Oswald was a fiction. You know, there was no incident where Oswald was arrested. Oswald was seen drinking a Coke in the lunchroom. That's total bullshit. Never happened. Totally fucking made up to cover for the fact that Baker made an arrest outside the Texas School Book Depository of Emilio Santana, who was the shooter at the Daltex, and that took him till at least 12:37. He didn't enter the building till at least 12:38, and so the entire timeline inside the book depository I had to rewrite. Because we've been totally lied to for fucking years. And when you see my new chronology that I put in place, the whole fucking thing makes perfect sense. You're like, Jesus Christ. And you realize what a fucking masterpiece of tradecraft this thing was, and how sloppy they were, and how they had to have so many fucking assholes on the Dallas Police Department cover for them. And man, it's unfucking believable. It's just the most incredible mystery in the fucking history of the world. So, all right, let me continue. Burnside, in my opinion, is worth talking to again. He was a friend of all the regulars of the Ryder Coffee House, especially Thornley. Jack Fraser pointed him out as someone who may be able to give us some information on Oswald and Thornley. He was supposedly in Fong's restaurant on Decatur Street with Thornley when Oswald came in to meet Thornley. He told this to someone and said that Thornley introduced him to Oswald. However, when confronted by this, by Weisberg and Reed, he denied it. The John Camus, I think it's Camus lead, Scambria. Camus worked at the Ryder Coffee House as a photographer. Really? So you got fucking coffee houses just hiring photographers? Give me a fucking break. It's a cover job for the CIA. He was a friend of all the regulars, especially Brady and Thornley. Supposedly, he or Helen Gladstone, who took care of Brady's affairs when he was deported, have negatives of the pictures that he took at the Ryder House. Reed knows how to contact him. All right, so we have a lead here that is scratched out. Why it is scratched out, I don't know, so let me read it. It says the Ivan Cotman lead. Ivan had a discussion group at his apartment at 514 Bourbon Street every Friday night. He frequented the Ryder Coffee House and knew all the regulars, especially Thornley. If no one has talked to him, he's worth talking to. Cotman is allegedly gay. Reed may be able to locate him. The Will Brady lead. Brady could be a good source of information, especially in regards to Shaw, Oswald, and Thornley. He is now in New York, and Weisberg has his address. He is worth talking to if someone is in the New York area. The Pat and Patty Gleason lead. See the Reed memo. The Gleasons lived in an apartment above the Ryder Coffee House, according to Stapleton. Patty was with her when Oswald came to the Ryder Coffee House and asked her for Jack Fraser. Subsequently, the Gleasons were supposedly seen sitting at a table with Oswald and a couple of other people in the Ryder Coffee House. Reed may be able to locate. Okay, so let me stop and pause right here. This is a pattern that you'll find is very persistent, particularly throughout the Kerry Thornley files, but you'll see it also in the false Oswald files. Here it says specifically, subsequently the Gleasons were supposedly seen sitting at a table with Oswald and a couple of other people in the Ryder Coffee House, okay? So let's just remember, Oswald worked at the Riley Coffee House. He didn't work for the Ryder Coffee House. The person associated with the Ryder Coffee House is Kerry Thornley. It is not Lee Harvey Oswald. Lee Harvey Oswald is not associated with Jack Fraser. He's not associated with any of these people. Garrison was unable to put Oswald in the company of all of these people, yet all of these people claimed that they had seen Lee Harvey Oswald. Now, how can that possibly be? Very simply, because Kerry Thornley was the man who was either intentionally or unintentionally mistaken for or intentionally identified as Lee Harvey Oswald for the purposes of establishing Oswald as a communist dissident, right? So I do feel that many of these times when Oswald was seen was actually Kerry Thornley being a lazy, fucking stupid jerk-off and going and hanging out places he shouldn't have been hanging out, being seen by people he shouldn't have been seen by, who then are later identified as Oswald when he fucking sure as hell wasn't intentionally impersonating Oswald at that particular time. Are you seeing what I'm saying here? So you have a combination of Kerry Thornley intentionally going out of his way to impersonate and set up Oswald, such as the incident at Jones Printing with Douglas Jones when he gets the Fair Play for Cuba flyers printed, right? So that's an intentional act of Thornley setting up Oswald. Although he gives the name of Leon Osborne, which happened to be another name of a guy in the unit that Oswald was in, which the only other person who would know that besides Oswald is Kerry Thornley, hence going to show the greater significance of the role that Kerry Thornley played in the setup, right? Heidel, all the stuff you hear about Alec Heidel, all that was fabricated by Kerry Thornley. So this is fantastic to me because here, I can demonstrate that clearly we have people being seen with Oswald at a place with other people who are known to associate with Thornley that nobody can place Oswald with these people, right? So it's clearly Kerry Thornley. This is a perfect example of the pattern that I'm talking about that you end up seeing in 100 fucking places. Continuing on, the Lonnie Goldfinch lead. From Alfred, Goldfinch is an ex-FBI informer who also worked for Guy Bannister. He is supposed to have known Oswald in New Orleans. He's presently living in Kansas City, and Reed is attempting to get his address for us. The Richard Carnot lead. Carnot was connected with the Modern Language Institute through his friendship with Ernesto Rodriguez and Roger Lovin. He supposedly met Oswald at the Napoleon Street Branch Library and was seen with him at the Ryder Coffee House. The Dave Graydon lead. See the prior Graydon memo. We have already talked to Graydon in regard to Will Brady, who used to be his roommate, however. We've not talked to him in regard to Eddie Porter, whom he knows from the Penny Arcade on Royal Street. He says that Porter knew Brady and some other people from around the Ryder Coffee House. He might possibly know Porter's friend John from the arcade, who was a friend of Oswald's. He's presently living in 1408 Podger Street, New Orleans. All right, the Golden Lantern lead. See the Kimball memo of 10-10-67 and the Soul memo of 4-8-69. In handwriting on the upper right is Chris Blake. Underlined, Kimball supposedly was introduced to Shaw by Ferry in late 1960 or early 61 in the Golden Lantern Bar at 1239 Royal Street, which was a gay bar. The owner of the bar at that time was Joseph A. Cologne. Perhaps he can help us in this matter or know someone who can. Court of Two Sisters lead. See the Court of Two Sisters file. We have received information from numerous sources that Lee Harvey Oswald was in the Court of Two Sisters. One of the waiters, see Frenchie Two's memo, identifies the picture of Thornley as a waiter who used to work at the court. However, Two's adds when he worked at the court, his hair was not like this. I suggest we talk to the following employees. And he has a list of employees. So can you see what Garrison's getting at? by putting all of this shit in the Kerry Thornley file, right? All of these different sightings of Oswald. Garrison knew was not Oswald, right? Could not possibly have been Oswald. Some of these were at times when Oswald was in the Soviet Union still, or in Dallas, or provably fucking somewhere else. Yet we have a person identified as Oswald who's seen amongst all of Kerry Thornley's friends in a bunch of places that Kerry Thornley is known to have associated. Hello. Can you see how fucking obvious it is that Kerry Thornley was impersonating Oswald, or at a minimum mistaken for Oswald in all of these various places? Now, when I say mistaken for Oswald, the CIA isn't stupid. Many times he was intentionally mistaken for Oswald, right? Like the times at the furniture store, or at the junkyard where he's seen with Marina and a child, right? Those are the intentional times. The times when he's like hanging out in a bar with some friends drinking beer, those could be unintentional. But nonetheless, all of these that Garrison has lumped together are Kerry Thornley. It says here, Reed and I have been talking to Margaret Tannenbaum and Mary Macias, attempting to acquire certain records and photos, and we will continue to do this. The Mrs. Gladys Rogers lead. Mr. and Mrs. Rogers live at 4907 Magazine Street. Her husband testified before the commission, but not her. She said that several days before Oswald moved, she observed an individual talking to her husband who asked for the location of the Oswalds. She describes this person as a white male, approximately 5'7", 175 pounds, dark complexion, had a foreign appearance, possibly Spanish. She also recalls seeing a young couple in their early 20s stopping in to see the Oswalds. She also recalls seeing a female who wore a white coat and whom she thinks was a welfare worker call at the Oswald apartment. Okay, so this is pretty interesting. Again, we're talking about stuff going on with Oswald at Magazine Street, so we're definitely talking about the real Oswald and Marina at their place. And this person described as okay, if you notice, it says white male but dark complexion. That is the FBI classification that's been on for like 100 years. And even modern day, when you see like Hispanics labeled as white males, that's just kind of standard how it's always been. It's not some weird conspiracy thing. So when he's described as a white male with a dark complexion, 5'7", 175 pounds, who does that also sound like? It sounds like the Hispanic who was seen at the junkyard with Oswald, a.k.a. Kerry Thornley. So this is most likely, once again, Louis Rebel. Could it be someone else? Could it be like Carlos Quiroga? Nah, he would have been way older. But see, Louis, that's when you go through the cast of characters, like the people's age, weight, description, all that stuff really matters when it comes to these specific identifications. So yeah, this is probably Louis Rebel. So therefore, here's another thing. So if we're going to see the repeated appearances of a Hispanic with Oswald, but it's definitely not Lawrence Howard, who's well over 5'10", 5'11", over 200 pounds to upwards of 300 pounds at times, you can clearly see the difference, right? You can clearly see the difference between the husky Latino with the pockmarked face, Lawrence Howard, with this person, the 5'7", 175, dark complexion, foreign appearance, possibly Spanish, being Louis Rebel. The only fucking kicker really is the Bolton Ford incident, where the person is described roughly as being over 200 pounds, yet 5'7" inches, 5'8" inches tall. But the giveaway there at Bolton Ford is the scar over the left eye, which will always be Lawrence Howard. So, what are we on to? This one's crossed off again, all scribbled out, so we have to read it. Brian Ampolek's lead. See FBI interview of 11/29/63. Brian Ampolex, 1418 Herring Road, Metairie, Louisiana, met Lee Harvey Oswald 1 or 2 days before Oswald was arrested for handing out leaflets on Canal Street. He and Oswald had about a 5-minute conversation on politics. While he was conversing with Oswald, he was aware that there was 1 or 2 other persons also handing out leaflets, but according to the report, he paid no attention to them and does not recall what they look like. Dorothy Regal or Reagan lead. Regal or Reagan allegedly was a hustler who knew Oswald and gave him money during the summer of '63. Interesting. I'm still trying to connect Monty DeMonte and what's his name, Sid Tarante. I'm still trying to connect those guys to this New Orleans crew. Can't do it. Haven't done it yet. But I know they were involved in the Galveston trip, so. All right, another one that's crossed off. I'm starting to come to the conclusion these ones that are crossed off just ended up being dead ends or they went nowhere, not that they were irrelevant. Lakefront Airport mechanically. David Ferry supposedly had a colored friend named Phillips who was a mechanic and who went to many places with him, including the Lakefront Airport. Unknown whether he was an airplane or automobile mechanic, Phillips supposedly was arrested for vagrancy on Orleans Avenue in 63 and given 30 days. He supposedly went before Judge Babylon. Handwritten notes say re Phillips in Lee Oswald's notebook. Lee Oswald's notebook, that's an interesting one. We're going to have to cover that one day. I'm not sure what to make of it. It's got all kinds of code and stuff written in there. All right, so next we have, looks like there's a whole bunch of names and addresses and phone numbers and stuff. Let me see. Did this stuff come from, could this stuff have come from Kerry Thornley's notebook? Quite possibly. We don't know that yet. Seeing the names on this, I'm thinking so, because I know Dick Billings, Joseph Ball, a couple of these people were in contact with Kerry Thornley. Names circled are Robert Sam Anson, Dick Billings, Robert Blakey, Joseph Ball. These are all people who are on the Warren Commission. That's what this appears to be. This actually appears to be a list of people who are on the Warren Commission. So I can skip past most of this. Paul Hawk and Seth Cantor. Okay, these names are on here also. Some interesting names. Ted Gandolfo. Paul Hawk, he's got some interesting documents in Harold Weisberg's archive. Really good stuff. Seth Cantor, he's an interesting one because he was a reporter in Dallas. He was the guy who started the rumor of the dead Secret Service agent, which ended up turning out to be fucking who knows what the hell happened with that. It's one of those weird anomalies in the Kennedy assassination I'll have to talk about one day, because there was a rumor, went out over the air and everything, that a Secret Service agent was killed in Dealey Plaza. I did some pretty deep research on it, found absolutely nothing. But yeah, Seth Cantor was also at Parkland Hospital when Jack Ruby shows up at approximately 12:15 to 12. What time was it? No, it was after, so it had to have been about 12:45 to 1 o'clock, right? So simultaneously, you have Seth Cantor, who is seeing Jack Ruby at Parkland Hospital around 12:45, or yeah, it's after the assassination, 12:45-ish, but simultaneously you have Jack Ruby being broadcast on the airwaves from the Dallas Morning News, and he's sitting there talking on a telephone. Well, how could that happen? Well, because it wasn't Jack Ruby. It was his brother Samuel Ruby, who was at the Dallas Morning News creating an alibi for Jack Ruby while Jack Ruby drove the green pickup truck over to Parkland Hospital. He will then later go to the Texas Theater, of course, where his pickup truck is searched out back. But I'm getting off track here. So some more of these names. James Kirkwood. This must be partial, like a complete list of names associated with the assassination, because James Kirkwood was involved with the Simon & Schuster printers, who was involved with publishing some of the books associated with the assassination. Mark Lane. Let me skip past a bunch of this crap. That's one thing about going into these files blind. You never know when you're going to come across like a 50-page black hole of like nothing. All right, here we go. We seem to be past it. We come upon a letter with the Winnipeg Free Press heading on, and it says here from to Dr. William Martin, Assistant District Attorney, New Orleans. It says the following is the promised memorandum on a few Canadian leads in your case against Clay Shaw. The affidavit from Winnipeg man who overheard the conversation at the airport is being made this week and will reach you later. Oh, this is some interesting stuff. This should connect to like Louis Bloomfield and Centro Mondial Commercial. Mr. Malcolm Campbell of 1099 East Lawn, Sarnia, Ontario, who wrote your office about an eyewitness to the Dallas shooting, cannot provide any more information on the subject. The Eyewitness Liberty Magazine editor, Norman Similis, is unavailable. Liberty Magazine was published by Consolidated Press until 1964, when it was sold to another company and folded after a few issues. When it wound up its operations, Mr. Similis was writing a serial on his experiences in Dallas, and in the last issue, Mr. Similis said that the next issue, which never appeared, would carry a picture taken of shots being fired at Kennedy. I made some inquiries regarding the sudden collapse of the publication, but people in the business seemed to be convinced that it was genuine financial trouble. They went broke, as one spokesman put it. Mr. Similis can't be located at the moment. A relative, Helen Similis of Toronto, probably an estranged wife or mad sister, doesn't want to talk about him at all and becomes irritated when someone mentions his name. The people he formerly worked with have lost track of him. His name has been mentioned, however, by Ramparts magazine and other critics of the Warren Report as one of a list of witnesses never interviewed by the Warren Commission. Ramparts misspelled his name quite badly. Mr. Keith Allen, 40, a Seattle accountant whose mother lives at 1189 Matthews Avenue, Vancouver, British Columbia. The address is listed in Shaw's notebook. Is a service buddy of your man. He's single and probably queer, but the last time he's seen Shaw was 20 years ago. They've been exchanging Christmas cards since Mr. Allen has never heard of Kootenai Bay. So Keith Allen, this is an interesting one. He is like, it says he's a Seattle accountant whose mother lives at 1189, but Mr. Keith Allen, if I'm not mistaken, was like connected to one of the ice skating teams up in Canada, one of the professional hockey teams, which I thought was an interesting connection to the Winterland. Kootenai Bay, British Columbia, June-September 1963 seems a very mysterious notation. The place is in the interior mountainous country of BC on the shore of a lake. A ferry runs across the lake to Kootenai Bay, and one can also reach the place from the south, from the U.S. by narrow, winding mountain road. There is one motel in the town, the Marianne Motel, but it doesn't seem to have a telephone. There are also campgrounds and cabins, and the whole area is a prime tourist region in the summer, especially from June to September. Mr. Larry Rogers, 25, of the St. James Town Apartments in downtown Toronto. His aunt and uncle live at 43 Warlock Crescent, Willowdale, Ontario, which was the address listed in Shaw's notebook. Also seems queer. He doesn't have a job, but is in the position to travel extensively, throw big parties, and generally live it up. Sounds like CIA to me. Has made several trips to London, England, where he has chummed around with Shaw and a group of decadent Englishmen, which included the former manager of Christine Keeler. He first met Shaw shortly before the Kennedy assassination, but he doesn't want to say where. In March of this year, he went to Dallas to visit friends in April and to New Orleans for the same reason. He intended to look Shaw up while he was there, but later decided not to. He last saw him in London in 1966. He knew Shaw as a very bright person who loved London, the theater, and big parties. He called Shaw a masochist. Rogers doesn't think Shaw had anything to do with an assassination of the President of the United States because Shaw didn't care about politics and didn't give a damn about the whole United States. He says he feels badly for Shaw because Shaw is a fun-loving fellow who likes a great time, likes to drink, and likes to spend money. This is the information I have gathered so far. If anything sounds interesting, I can pursue these things further, of course. It would probably be easier for me as a Canadian newspaperman than for you as a New Orleans prosecutor. I have not yet written any story on the things discussed above for the newspaper, but I hope you will keep in mind that I am always interested in a story when something develops. I'll play ball with you any way you like, whatever confidential information you have that you don't want published, but that might help me in tying up loose ends will be safe with me. I might add that I am professionally as well as personally interested in helping your investigation any way I can. What you are doing in New Orleans takes a great deal of courage. It's probably the most difficult job a district attorney has ever undertaken in this century, but it has to be done for history's sake. I sincerely hope you succeed. And that's from Pieter Van Bennekom of the Free Press in Winnipeg. All right, memorandum, February 20th, 1968, reference Kerry Thornley. Joyce Talley on Juanita Abbott as lead. To Jim Garrison from Lynn Loisel, reference Martin McAuliffe, deceased. On Tuesday, February 13th, 1968, Martin McAuliffe came into the district attorney's office and was interviewed by Loisel and Bethel. Mr. McAuliffe was asked if he knew Kerry Thornley and how well he knew him. McAuliffe said that he had seen Kerry Thornley at the Bourbon House on 2 occasions sometime in 1963. McAuliffe also said on both occasions he was either with one of his students from LSUNO, whose name is Joyce Talley, or could have been with his secretary, Juanita Abbott. McAuliffe said that he was introduced on both occasions to Thornley by either of the women he was with at the time. Thornley had requested McAuliffe to read copies of manuscripts of books he was writing. McAuliffe said that one manuscript was about a man on guard duty in Japan, and he was looking at his shadow in the puddles. McAuliffe said that after he read this and some other trash that Thornley had, he brushed him off and tried to avoid him. McAuliffe also said that actually Thornley had short stories which contained mostly sketches. Loisel showed several pictures of Thornley to McAuliffe, but McAuliffe said he could not recognize Thornley. McAuliffe said that all he remembered about Thornley is that he was real skinny. McAuliffe was asked if he ever had any political discussions with Thornley in regard to Oswald. McAuliffe said Thornley had asked him if he knew Oswald or had come into contact with him because of their two opposing groups, and McAuliffe said that he did not know Oswald. McAuliffe was then asked if he knew Carlos Bernier and was shown a picture of Bernier. McAuliffe said that he did not recognize Bernier but might have heard of him on television or in the newspapers. McAuliffe then asked if he had ever been to Bernier's clothing store in the 100 block of Decatur Street. McAuliffe replied that he hadn't, but that he had been to a barroom in the 100 block to collect money for the Cuban organization, but doesn't remember of seeing Bernier at that time. McAuliffe then told Loisel that the district attorney's office should get a 1962 copy of LSUNO's newspaper, The Beachcomber, which contains an article that Thornley had written. Okay, so this becomes significant right here. A 1962 of a college newspaper that contains an article that Thornley had written. This becomes significant because Thornley at one point, I believe, denies that he had ever been involved in any kind of journalism, but yet we have repeated incidents of him being seen posing as a photographer, him writing for various newspapers, him associating with WDSU in New Orleans. And so when you see this where it says that he in 1962 had an article published, that basically connects him with journalistic endeavors, and it becomes one of a handful of incidents that creates a chain proving that Thornley was a liar, that he was not associating with organizations of this type at these times, right? So why he denied it and why he told Garrison that he hadn't been involved in this kind of any kind of journalism and stuff until after the assassination, I really don't know. And I think if I'm not mistaken, he actually backtracks on that and then contradicts himself in some of his statements to Garrison. But yeah, it's just interesting that, like, for me, this is like a very small dot that creates a much bigger dot in as far as the character development of Kerry Thornley. And, of course, some associations and whatnot. What is this? All right, this is only a one-pager. This is an article in a newspaper, March 18th, 1967, National Guardian, New Orleans DA charges conspiracy by Robert Allen. New questions raised on JFK killing. Let us read this. This will give us an interesting peek into what the consensus was in 1967 on the Kennedy assassination. The complicated skein of events involved in the assassination of President John F. Kennedy became even more tangled with the arrest March 1st of Clay L. Shaw, described in the press as a prominent New Orleans businessman. New Orleans District Attorney Jim Garrison, who made the arrest, contended in a search warrant that the secret meetings in September of 1963, there was an agreement and combination among Clay Shaw, alias Clay Bertrand, Lee Harvey Oswald, and David W. Ferry, and others to kill John F. Kennedy. I'm going to avoid commentary. I'm just going to read the article as it is. If you know my work at all, you know how I feel about these things as already, so. At Guardian Press Time, a preliminary hearing concerning this contention was in progress. Shaw said at a press conference March 2nd that he had played no part in an alleged conspiracy, and that he denied he had ever met or known Oswald or Ferry. He said that he had never used the name Clay Bertrand. Ferry, a former airlines pilot and alleged homosexual, was found dead in his bed February 23rd. Garrison called the death a suicide. A coroner attributed it to natural causes. The Guardian has received reports from Rome linking Shaw with various right-wing organizations and individuals and possibly the CIA. The Guardian's Rome correspondent, Phyllis Rosner, quoting the Rome daily Pesa Sera, reported that from 1961 till 1965, Shaw was on the board of directors of the Centro Mondial Comercial, which the paper said was engaged in obscure dealings in Rome. Among the directors of the CMC board, said Pesera, were several Swiss businessmen and bankers, the ex-Hungarian Peasant Party leader Ferenc Nagy, now living in the U.S., Prince Getier de Spadafora, large Italian landowner and industrialist who was related by marriage to Hitler's financial wizard Hjalmar Schacht, and Dr. Enrico Mantello, who presented himself and 6 other shareholders, the most important being the former U.S. Army Major L.M. Bloomfield, now reportedly a banker in Montreal. Bloomfield is reported to have served in the OSS, which was the predecessor of the CIA. During World War II, French newspapers have charged. The Rome Daily said that he was a generous contributor to neo-fascist groups in France, Italy, and throughout Europe. Pesa Sarah said it is believed that CMC was set up by the CIA as a cover for channeling funds into Italy. It was also reported to The Guardian from a source in New Orleans that Shaw was instrumental in something with Batista's Cuba from, can't read it, it's obscured, for 13 years until 1965, something as a director of the International Trade Mart in New Orleans, an organization which was reportedly to have arranged for the first visit of a delegation from the United States to South Africa. Shaw reportedly played a part in arranging for Kennedy to speak at the Dallas Trade Mart on November 22, 1963, the date of the assassination, a fact to which degree determined the fatal motorcade route from the Dallas airport. The name Clay Bertrand figures in the report of the Warren Commission's 1964 investigation. Dean Andrews, a lawyer in the New Orleans area, testified that Oswald and several homosexuals, whom he described as Mexicanos, were sent to his law offices in the summer of 1963 by a person named Clay Bertrand. Andrews said that Oswald wanted to help in getting his dishonorable discharge from the Marines changed to an honorable discharge. Andrews told the commission that on November 23, 1963, Bertrand called him and asked him to go to Dallas to defend Oswald. Andrews said he was in a hospital and been under sedation at the time. He said he called another New Orleans attorney, Monk Zeldin, since he was unable to go to Dallas himself. The FBI could find no record of Oswald's visit to Andrews or locate the person who allegedly called Andrews, although it did confirm that Andrews and Zeldin had talked about representing Oswald. Andrews was said to have given conflicting descriptions of Bertrand to the FBI and the commission, and at one point he reportedly told the FBI that Bertrand was a figment of his imagination. According to Mark Lane in Rush to Judgment, Andrews said that he was so hounded by the FBI agents like a plague that he told them to write whatever they wanted in their report and to close their file on him. The agents evidently closed the file by writing that Andrews acknowledged that Bertrand did not exist, despite the fact that Andrews swore he had never made such a statement. Andrews also said that he saw Bertrand only twice and that Bertrand was mostly a voice on the phone. Shaw, in the March 2nd news conference, said that he knew of Andrews, but was not personally acquainted with him. Andrews was questioned by Garrison March 2nd. Afterwards, Andrews told reporters he had talked with Bertrand by telephone 10 or 12 times in a year. He said Bertrand sent boys to him for illegal representation. If the defendants were unable to pay the attorney's fee, he said Bertrand would. Andrews said he didn't know whether Bertrand and Shaw were the same man. The New York Post quoted him on March 2nd as saying he couldn't say for sure. The same day, Acting Attorney General Ramsey Clark said that on the basis of an investigation November-December 1963 by the FBI, no connection was established between Shaw and the Kennedy assassination. The Clark statement makes it clear that Shaw was the subject of an inquiry, yet Shaw's name is not mentioned once in the 29 volumes of the Warren Commission report, nor in any other documents in the National Archives related to the assassination. There is testimony only concerning Clay Bertrand. A Justice Department official told reporters that his agency was convinced that Bertrand and Shaw were one and the same, and that this was the basis for Clark's statement. Another aspect of the New Orleans investigation involves Cuban exiles. Several exiles in Miami and one who was a prisoner in Louisiana State Prison apparently have been questioned by Garrison's investigators. A source in Garrison's office told the New York Post March 3rd the investigations had been made at 2 sites in the New Orleans area, which reportedly had been used by the CIA to train Cuban exiles for the Bay of Pigs invasion in 1961. It was also reported that Oswald had been arrested with 3 Cubans in the summer of 1963 while distributing Fair Play for Cuba Committee literature. He told police and the FBI that he was a member of the New Orleans branch of Fair Play, which had 35 members. No such branch, however, had been chartered by the National Fair Play for Cuba Committee, and apparently he was the only member. Strangely enough, Oswald, or a person looking very much like Oswald, also reportedly met with anti-Castro Cubans in the summer or fall of 1963. This brings into play the, quote, two Oswalds theory advanced by Harold Weisberg in Whitewash. This theory holds that the alleged conspiracy to kill Kennedy used a false Oswald and placed him in compromising situations in order to implicate the real Oswald as the lone assassin. That's exactly what they fucking did. Sorry, I couldn't make it to the last paragraph to not comment. That's exactly what they fucking did. This theory holds that the alleged conspiracy to kill Kennedy used a false Oswald and placed him in compromising situations in order to implicate the real Oswald as the lone assassin. Booyah, motherfuckers! That's exactly what happened, and the two men that they used for that were primarily Kerry Thornley and William Seymour. Not mysterious, not fucking voodoo, not none of that weird shit. It's typical, straight-up CIA tradecraft. And that's how they pulled off the assassination, by setting up Oswald all over the place for fucking years. And they screwed up because they set Oswald up at a time when that motherfucker was still in the Soviet Union. Okay? All right, let me read this last paragraph. The allegations listed in Garrison's search warrant were based on statements obtained from a confidential informant who was said to have taken part in the secret meetings with Shaw in September of 1963. That's Perry Rousseau. The reliability of this information was reportedly checked by using sodium pentothal and so-called truth serum. It was expected that the identity of this informant would be revealed. Yeah, like I said, it's Perry Rousseau. And so let me just comment on this article from 1967 in New Orleans, okay? They go deep into Clay Shaw and his connections to Enrico Mantello, the brother of George Mantello. Mantello is not their real name. The real name is Mandel, but he's a fucking Jew. So when we went to goddamn Italy, he just told people his name was Mantello so he would fit in better, right? Typical. And all the people they named here, Hjalmar Schacht, who was like Hitler's finance minister, was involved with CMC. And this is how it went down. The assassination orders came from Ben-Gurion to the Mossad, which at the time was run by Yitzhak Rabin. And then you have the men on the ground who were Menachem Begin and Yitzhak Shamir, who were in Dallas and on November 22nd, but they were living in Los Angeles for the months leading up to it. And from there, the orders went over to Permindex, which is kind of like an oversight board, which was comprised of all the guys that you mentioned here. And then the money was funneled through Centre Mondial Commercial, CMC, of which Clay Shaw and Louis Bloomfield sat on the board of directors. That connects to Montreal and all the trips they took to Montreal involving like Lambert and Diaz and all that stuff we talked about last time. So do you see how all this stuff fits together perfectly into what really happened? And they knew about this in fucking 67 thanks to Pesa Sarà, which was an Italian newspaper who spilled the fucking beans on CMC. Ha! Right? So, the assassination was about 70% solved at this point in 1967. And the last 50 years since then has been nothing but an attempt to obscure all the information that has come out relating to CMC and Permindex. And if you want to understand CMC and Permindex, you got to fucking read the book by Michelle Mehta. I'm going to try to get it right because it's so goddamn long. CMC, the Mossad and CIA station and the assassination of John F. Kennedy. Or something like that. Michelle Mehta with one T. Fucking amazing book, amazing research. Connects all the dots between Israel, George Mantello, Permindex, CMC, Louis Bloomfield, Clay Shaw, and all the guys surrounding it, guys who like imported the rifle, like Samuel Cummings was connected to CMC through a guy named Enrico Fertoli. Really good stuff. So Michelle Mehta, 2 thumbs up on his fucking work. I'd love to have a conversation with that guy. No idea how to get a hold of him. What else does it talk about in this article? So it talked about Dean Andrews calling Monk Zeldin. These guys were all fucking mob lawyers too. Yeah, and it says here, a Justice Department official told reporters his agency was convinced that Bertrand and Shaw were the same person. Of course they were. And that really is one of the few confirmations that you'll have from a Justice Department official. So, yeah, really fascinating stuff. And remember, this is all in the Kerry Thornley files, right? So Kerry Thornley was very central in all of this stuff that was going on in New Orleans. And Garrison knew it. Garrison fucking knew it. So, let me see. We've got about 20 pages killed today. I think I'm going to call it for the day. And we're going to pick this up tomorrow. So, yeah, that's going to be it for me. Go ahead and like and subscribe and all that shit. Honestly, I fucking despise the marketing end of what I do. I fucking hate it. I hate having to promote the shit. I just wish I could just read the documents all day. But unfortunately, I have to promote the stuff. You can go to coryhughes.org. If you want to pre-order my book, which I highly recommend you do, because it comes with all my notes. You can go to buymeacoffee.com/JFK Book.
And yeah, that's about it. So I'm going to sign off for the day. Appreciate you guys tuning in, and I'll see you tomorrow.